Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric series on the MiSTer FPGA D10 Nano project, more specifically in this instance the unfinished Sharp X68000 core. I've been getting a ton of questions lately about testing this again, even though it hasn't been updated, and that's probably because I'm in the middle of a Sharp X68000 retrospective on the channel. But every time I mention this computer, people keep asking me how good is the MiSTer FPGA core and what can you play on it, so I figured we'd go through today and talk about some games that you can play and you can enjoy. Starting off, obviously, Street Fighter is one of those games that is synonymous with the Sharp X68000, and while there's totally better versions of this game to play on MiSTer FPGA, obviously the arcade original being the best, we're going to take a look at Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition here. Now this is working, you can play the game, it has music, it is just missing all of the sound effects, so any punches, kicks, strikes, or otherwise, you're not going to be able to hear them right now. So there's something in this game that uses some form of the Sharp X68000 sound hardware that either isn't working or isn't implemented yet in the core, and that's kind of the thing when you go through the Sharp X68000 library and test games on MiSTer. Some games you'd have absolutely no idea the core wasn't finished, other games you'll notice there's some missing items, sound or graphics, and other games will just absolutely not work. And it's not like the Sharp X68000 has a small library either, so to test all of these would take a long time. It's kind of going through the top level hits here and games you asked to see. But as far as the gameplay and performance on Street Fighter 2, it feels close to real hardware. There seems to be some speed issues going on here with some slowdown and speed up, so it's not something that's going to be perfect, but you can at least get a sense of how the graphics draw on the X68000. And if you're not aware, this computer was basically the development kit for Capcom CPS and CPS2 hardware, so you get a very faithful port from the arcade board to the X68000. I wish one day some of those SDKs would make their way online so we could see exactly how Capcom made these games and people could play around with the hardware. But in the meantime, you can definitely just check out the Sharp X68000 core and give it a go. If I was going to give Street Fighter 2 a playability score, 1 being absolutely non-functional, you can tell that's not the case here, and 10 being 100% perfect to the original hardware, I'd probably say it's a 6 to a 6.5. Graphically, it looks great, but you're definitely missing all of those sound effects, which is going to be a bummer, and the speed up and slow down is definitely not something that the original hardware would do. So I wouldn't say go into this one and play it thinking you're going to totally enjoy yourself. If you just want to play Street Fighter 2, go to the arcade core. Now moving over to Daimaki Yamura, this is a game you can just pick it up and play it today on the Sharp X68000 core. It is going to be basically one-to-one identical as to what you would experience on the original Sharp X68000. But again, if you can't tell a theme here, we have this as an arcade core as well from Hotego on the arcade side of things, so you have that version. But honestly, the Sharp X68000 versus the CPS is very, very hard to tell the difference. If I didn't tell you I was playing that version of the game right now on PC, you'd probably have no idea unless you were really eagle-eyed or this was one of your favorite games of all time. And honestly, I love the entire Ghouls and Ghosts franchise, and the Sharp X68000 version is a very fun way to play the game. And this is an instance in which it is just running, so if I was going to give this one a playability score, I would say we're probably at a 9 to a 9.5. There could be some small tiny issues here or there that I have not spotted, but honestly I'd be hard pressed to be able to find them if I watched the footage for the next 30 minutes on a loop. And that is the nice thing about this core. There are some games that are just going to run exactly as you would expect, and it really does tell us that it would be great if this core could get finished by somebody, because I've been holding off on buying an original Sharp X68000 computer because they are extremely expensive. You're talking about a minimum of $1,000, and if it's been recapped and had the power supply changed out, probably closer to $1,500 to $2,000, where if we had a one-to-one FPGA core, I'd have no reason to buy that. So that's kind of the reason I always love talking about X68000 and hoping it gets finished. I'm just trying to save myself a lot of money. But this game has an absolutely amazing soundtrack, one of the best soundtracks Capcom ever made in my opinion. So go ahead and listen for 45 seconds to get a good earful of that audio, and you leave me a comment telling me if it sounds like what you expect it to, or if you hear anything in the soundtrack or sound effects that would end up being less than accurate. Honestly, it sounds exactly like Daimakimura does to my ears when I play it on the arcade version, so I think we are good here. But do be aware, for every game like Daimakimura, you're going to have another game which just throws absolute garbage up on the screen. So don't expect 100% compatibility and you will not be disappointed. And now moving over to another game that if there's any issues with it whatsoever, I would not be able to find them even if I stared at the footage for the next day. It's going to be Cotton. Now, this is an absolutely amazing shmup, but again, it's another title that we have an arcade core for. So in some instances, playing around with the Sharp X68000 is just seeing a different way to do the same thing, but of course, I will still go over some games that don't exist on arcade cores. But interestingly enough, a lot of the arcade games are the ones that actually end up running really well on the core as it sits. If you've never played Cotton before, it is an absolutely fun horizontal shmup. You're going to have a ton of fun with this one if you've never checked it out. And as far as the Sharp X68000 core is concerned, the parallax scrolling is here, all of the sprites are here, all of the animation, everything just looks like you're playing on a real X68000 PC, and that's all we ever want. Every once in a while you might see a little weirdness in some of the power-ups, but that could just be a situation where it's in the original computer as well. But of course, not having bought a Sharp X68000 yet, I really can't compare against them. But maybe I will pick one up if the core never progresses. But again, this is just so impressive. But you see that little bit of extra line up there on the lightning attack that is not on the arcade PCB. So that is a situation where I believe the core is slightly stumbling, but it is the tiniest of stumbles. Everything else here is just so fun to look at, so fun to play. All of the speed is correct on the X68000 core. You really would be hard pressed to find anything other than a few stray pixels here and there that weren't working correctly. So if I had to give this one a playability score 1 to 10, I'd probably put it at an 8.75. Sure, there's a little bit of graphical corruption every once in a while, but it really is hard to actually make that happen, and for the most part when you're playing the game, you really would have no idea that you were playing on a core that wasn't completed. I'd say the X68000 core is probably 75 to 80% of the way done, but I am just kind of guesstimating at that. But it is another game that has amazing audio both in the soundtrack front as well as coming out of the core, so a 30-second sound sample this time. Listen in here if you can find anything that isn't working right, and I'll be right back with some more games. Sounds good to me, but you'll let me know what you think down below. But as far as the graphics are concerned, the gameplay, the controls, the audio, we're getting really close to a perfect implementation here. It really does go to show just how good this core can be when you pick the right games for it. And if you pick the wrong games for it, you're going to know pretty much instantaneously. Speaking of the wrong games, let's move over to another Street Fighter, the new Challengers, different version, same game. Now, if you try to play this one, mute your speakers because some of the audio that comes through on this sounds like Hellspawn just calling from the abyss. It is scratchy, it is loud, it sounds like screaming, and it's nothing that you're going to want to listen to. But there seems to be something in this one on the sound side that isn't working well on the core, but interestingly enough, the actual gameplay is better and has less slowdown than the first Street Fighter game we showed you, so it's kind of a mixed bag as far as Street Fighter is concerned. One game has slowdown, but it does have music and no sound effects. This game either has no audio whatsoever, or it sounds like someone is just screaming in your ear about as loud as they possibly could. And that's not a knock against the core. Obviously, things take time to develop, but this one really isn't in active development. I would probably say it is everyone's #1 core they'd love to see finished. But of all the cores on MiSTer FPGA that aren't done yet, which one do you want to see finished first? I would be curious because I feel like everyone's just going to say X68000, but I'm sure there's some outliers there. But if you take a look at the animations, the speed, the background, everything, graphically this looks 100% perfect. It is just in the audio where it falls down. So I would say if I had to give this one a playability score, if you mute it, I would say it's like an 8.5 out of 10. If you leave the audio on, I would say it's a 2 out of 10. You're not going to want to do anything with this game if you can actually hear it in the background, but that's such an easy fix. Just mute your television and you're good to go. And that's what I recommend for all work in progress cores that are not finished. turn your volume down very low, see what you're getting, and then turn the volume back up so you can kind of get a better sense of what you're actually listening to. Now moving over to Space Harrier, this is an interesting one. Sometimes the audio works, sometimes it doesn't. If you reset the game, sometimes it comes back up. It kind of just seems to have a little bit of a stumble when it actually boots up and gets into the game. But as far as the performance is concerned and the graphics are concerned, you would have no idea that this was running on an unfinished core versus a real Sharp X68000 PC. And that's kind of the fun thing about testing these games, just seeing what they do, how they're running, and letting you know whether or not I think they're playable. And if you do enjoy series like this, playing games on unfinished cores just to see how they're working, the ones that aren't in development, unlike stuff like Sega Saturn or CDI, do let me know, because maybe I'll make a part 2 of this X68000 series, because it seems like everyone is so enamored with this computer, me included. It's just one of those things. It was that kind of god tier PC back in the day. We all know about it, and now we all really want to play it, and some of us even want one in our collections. But Space Harrier, as far as playability is concerned, 10 out of 10 if you don't factor in the missing music and audio. I would say an 8 out of 10 if you do factor that in, because if you don't have audio, the game is not as fun. If you do have audio, then there doesn't really seem to be any problems with it whatsoever. So definitely check Space Harrier out. It's an awesome port of an awesome game, and for the most part it's running completely fine on the core, pun very much intended, as we run along the ground there. And one more game that kind of shows off just how powerful the X68000 could be. This is Night Arms. It is a low frame rate, but that's exactly how it would work in real hardware. This has sprite scaling, it has some rotation, it has a lot of different graphical effects going on, and everything here in the core looks exactly like it would if you used original hardware. I actually had somebody I know who owns a Sharp X68000 take a peek for me on the footage, and they said it looked exactly like Night Arms. So it is really interesting what games are just 100% working and what games have problems. That's all down to how it implements different features in the hardware, because of course not every single game uses the hardware in the exact same manner. That's why you end up in situations on unfinished cores where one game you'd have no idea the core wasn't finished, and the next game does absolutely nothing. And I love how this game goes from basically an over-the-shoulder sprite scaler to a complete side-scrolling game as well. Sometimes it feels like it's running a little bit fast, but Night Arms just has a tendency to do that. If you never checked this out before, I definitely recommend it. It can be very difficult. It takes a few lives to actually get further into the game, but otherwise it is a ton of fun. And you'll see here just popping in, you can change the CPU speed from turbo to stock if it is running a little bit too fast. So do keep aware of that. Some games do have that setting. Sometimes you want to leave it on turbo to get extra frames, sometimes you want to dial it back, but there's different versions of the Sharp X68000, some with faster CPUs and some even beyond the traditional Motorola 68000, jumping up to a 68020 as well. So if you're playing around, do be aware that that turbo button is in there, and you might want to utilize it here and there, just like you did back in the old days of PCs. But that's the current situation with the current Sharp X68000 core, just testing some games because you guys asked me to do it. And if you do enjoy this and want to see a part 2, let me know. If this does well on views, maybe I will make that. But I do hope one day the X68000 core does get finished, because it's one of those computers I've always wanted one. They're expensive as hell, and I'd love just to use MiSTer FPGA. But short of that, we're done, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.